Hi everyone. This video is a very special video. It is a book review, but not just any book review. It is my annual Emmett Till book review. This is either my 5th or my 6th annual book review. I'm really not sure. Every year I do a book review about Emmett Till's life and his murder case on his birthday, which is July 25th, which is today. And I reflect on everything that has transpired since that time, the things that I have learned about the case, about history, and also my own perspectives. Because as time has gone by, I feel like I have more questions than I do answers. I went back into some of my old videos to see what books I've actually reviewed over the course of the years. I think the oldest one I did was in 2017, and I've written them all down. And also, if you see this light just going up, blinking, it's just too high and I can't reach it at. I'll just have to stand on like 3 chairs to change the light bulb. So we're just going to be flashing like this throughout this video. I do apologize. So the first book that I reviewed was called A Wreath for Emmett Till. That is probably the second Emmett Till book I had ever read. I read it in high school. It was a heroic crown of sonnets written by Marilyn Nelson, and I loved the book so much I memorized it. Second book was The Blood of Emmett Till, and that was in 2018 or 2019. The man that wrote it, the author, he's the only author that I've come across so far that interviewed Carolyn Bryant. I haven't come across any other book with an interview with Carolyn Bryant except for his book. And in his book, she mentioned that she also was writing a book that would be published 50 years after her death, which I'm just like, girl, we gonna be preparing a book burning for that time. The third book that I read, it might have been 2019 or 2020. I'm actually not sure. And it was called Simeon's Story. And Simeon was Emmett Till's cousin. I believe he was the son of Moses Wright, which was Emmett Till's uncle. And Simeon was there when Emmett Till was kidnapped from Moses Wright's house. The fourth book, I don't know if I did a book review, but it was in 2020, and that was the year I published my Emmett Till book. So I have an Emmett Till book, and it's very short because it's a poem. I would have made it longer, but I just felt like I just don't really do long books like that. So that year, I was just focused on my Emmett Till book. And then last year, the book that I reviewed was Let the People See. And that book really focused on the differences between North and South, the intensity of relationships between the Northern and Southern people and race relations. It was really good. There's also 2 other books that I've read and completed ages ago, but I have not done a book review on them. The first book is The Death of Innocence, which is, I believe, actually the first book about Emmett Till that I ever read. And it was written by his mother. And the second book was The Lynching of Emmett Till, a documentary narrative. So, A Wreath for Emmett Till, the documentary narrative, and his mother's book were the 3 books I had as a teenager that I would read a lot and use as reference materials before I got the other books. So this year, the book that I am somewhat reviewing is Emmett Till, The Murder That Shocked and Propelled the Civil Rights Movement. This right here was published in 2017 by Devery S. Anderson. I honestly don't recall where I first saw this book. I believe I may have seen it when I was visiting Memphis, Tennessee, and I was visiting the Civil Rights Museum, and I saw the book in the store. And I immediately took a mental photograph of the cover. So I know the cover when I see it, and that's why I ended up getting this book. Now, this year, I was actually going to postpone my annual Emmett Till book review, so I wasn't reading anything at all, but then I had a change of heart because I just felt very bad that I was going to be postponing. I was like, girl, what are you doing? It's Emmett Till's birthday. So I decided that I was going to do that. And this book right here is very thick. It's about 500, almost 600 pages. I've only read 120 pages so far. So this book review is really going to be just what I have read so far. I haven't gone through the entire book, but I'll give you just enough where we can finish it together one day, and maybe I'll make a part 2. It really depends. But it's called Emmett Till, the Murder That Shocked the World and Propelled the Civil Rights Movement. So before I get into what I've learned so far from this book and what I've learned so far just researching about Emmett Till, let me tell you a little bit about the author, who is Devery. There's a S. Anderson. I went to his website and I literally could not find a bio. So I'm going on signaturebooks.com to get a bio. And it says, Devery S. Anderson, raised among the timber companies, paper mills, and aluminum plant in Longview, Washington, Devery attended Ricks College and served in LDS mission. LDS, I believe, maybe Latter-day Saints, like Mormonism, the Church of Latter-day Saints, but don't quote me on that. In London, before returning to his hometown, he spent a decade reading history books and conducting independent research projects before returning to school in 1993 at Lower Columbia College, and then moving to Salt Lake City in 1994 to attend the University of Utah. Devery earned a BA in History in 1997 and a Master's in Publishing from George Washington University in 2018. His personal interest in the Mormon intellectual community led him to investigate the origins of Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought. And he wrote an award-winning 4-part history on the subject. One more installment is planned. I actually want to read more about Mormons because the more I come across, the more questions I have. And I really do want to understand, like, Mormonism. Like, I do have the Book of Mormon, but I haven't read it. So I guess I'll have to start reading it. Additionally, Devery began researching the murder of Emmett Till, the black teenager whose 1955 death advanced the Civil Rights Movement. Over the course of a decade, Devery developed relationships with Till family members, interviewed countless witnesses involved in the case, and released his book, Emmett Till, The Murder That Shocked the World and Propelled the Civil Rights Movement, in 2015. Rosanna Grace of Serendipity Film Group optioned the book that same year, later joined forces with Will Smith, Jay-Z, Aaron Kaplan, John Powers Middleton, and David Clark to executive produce the limited series based on the book called Women of the Movement, which premiered on ABC in January 2022. And he also published a book this year called A Slow Calculated Lynching, the story of Clyde Kennard or Kennard, I don't really know. The Salt Lake branch of the NAACP recognized Devery's efforts with its Albert Fritz Civil Rights Award in 2016. He is the father of 3 grown children and grandfather to 2 young girls. So that is Devery. He's about 63 now. I don't know how many more books he's going to write. I think it will really be interesting. I think he's an author that I'd like to follow, because so far from what I've read, he really did his research. Like, some of the questions that I had, or the curiosities or names that I forgot, he brought them up in this book. So far it has been great. Another, oops, shoot, hold on. Okay, so let us start. He talks about how he found out in the preface about Emmett Till. He essentially found out about Emmett Till when coming across his story in Eyes on the Prize, which was a documentary. It was the first episode. Here I heard the name of Emmett Till for the first time and watched in horror as I encountered his story. From that moment, Emmett Till became a constant presence in my life. At first, the questions I had left me with little peace. Whatever happened to this child's mother? Was she still living? Or had she died somewhere after a lonely, obscure life? Whatever happened to those who killed young Till? Did they go on to prosper? Were they gloating over the fact that they had gotten away with murder? Had they come to feel remorse? I set out immediately to find out, because this curiosity preceded my discovery of the internet by about a year, and it took me a while. I found myself looking through every book I could find on 20th century Black studies, and I was surprised at how infrequently I encountered Emmett Till. I feel like I went through the same problem, but not just with Emmett Till, like with other people in history too, like Blind Tom, or Joseph Seaman Cotter Jr., or somebody like that, like, or Francis Ellen Watkins Harper, or even like a little bit about Phyllis Wheatley, like, so I understand his struggle. I think it's also interesting, from all of the books that I've read and all of the people that I've talked to, some of them being from Mississippi, some of them like being alive at the time that Emmett Till was lynched, how everybody, for some reason, remembers either where they were or how old they were or when they found out about Emmett Till. So I remember there's a customer recently that was in Mississippi at the time, like near Money, Mississippi, that told me like how the environment was at the time of Emmett Till's lynching, and how like it was just, you could feel it in the air, the intensity in the air. I found out about Emmett Till, so there were actually two incidents, and I've mentioned this before in other videos. I was about 14 years old. I went to Harris Stowe every year when I was like really into community building and stuff. I would go to the Martin Luther King event every year at Harris Stowe. And I would go to the march. So Harris Stowe State University would always have these long, unnecessarily long Martin Luther King Day celebration programs. So I'm just sitting in the balcony and with my mom, and the speaker mentioned Emmett Till's name. And the only reason I remembered was because of how the audience reacted. They were like, oh, like somebody gasped, and there's like whispering and different things, and I'm just like, huh? So of course this is going to pique my curiosity, because I was always reading about Black history at the time. I had to. My history books were lying. I was around a lot of racist people. I had racist neighbors. I had to read. Just to keep my own sanity, to know that I wasn't crazy or that I wasn't tripping. So I remembered Emmett Till's name in my head. And a couple of months later, I was at Ujamaa Maktaba I was in a writing group, so we were having a performance, so we were having like a reading, because the teacher that started the children's writing group also had her own adult writing group. So it was like we were all having a performance. Ujamaa Maktaba, if you don't know what that was, it was a bookstore. They had a couple of different locations. I don't know if it was 3 different locations or if they just kept moving and closing and moving and closing. But the owner of that bookstore died. But I loved Ujamaa Maktaba. It was a place where you could get any book on Black history that you desired. It was a meeting place. People loved going there. And I saw Emmett Till's name on a book. And it was his mother's book. It was Emmett Till, The Death of Innocence. Hold on 1 second. I'll show you. Because it's better to show you than just to talk about it. Must have been like 15 years old. It was this book. So I said, oh, that's that person I heard about at MLK program. So I flipped through the book and I saw his picture and it just got burned in my memory. And since then, I've just been researching everything I can find about him in the case. So I understand what this author was going through. It's like once you see the photograph of his face, it just does something to your psyche. It just, you can't unsee it. It's burned into your mind. You feel, I don't know, everybody feels some type of way about it. Like some people feel horrified, some people feel terrified, some people have nightmares. It really depends. So eventually, the author went on his journey to learn more about Emmett Till. And he ended up meeting Emmett Till's mother and getting in contact with the family. And also getting in contact with, I think it's Keith Beauchamp, if that's his name. Keith Beauchamp. Here I go again. Hold on. Hold on. Shoot. Do I have it? Nope. Okay, I used to have it. Keith Beauchamp made a documentary about Emmett Till. I thought I had it in my DVDs, but I don't. He ended up meeting him. And one thing that the author said that really stood out to me in the preface was this. I have learned more about the Emmett Till case in the last decade of research and writing than I ever thought possible. However, this knowledge has come as a double-edged sword in many respects. More than anything else, my aim has been to tell the story as accurately and thoroughly as I can. And I wanted the depths of my research to be reflected in that. Since the mid-1980s, Mamie Till Mobley and others who were involved in the case have written or spoken publicly about their experience. As I scoured the earliest newspaper accounts, interviews, speeches, and principles in this saga, which were provided days, weeks, or just a few months after the events, I have discovered that later reminiscences often conflict with 1955 accounts. Certainly, this is to be expected in some degree. And I completely understand what he's saying, because as I have been reading the books, not as a historian, not as a researcher, just as a reader, reading all of these different books on Emmett Till, like, you just start to think, like, well, what did happen? This person says this, and that person says that, and that person says that, and what? And you end up with more questions. Like, my question that I have is, what happened to the Black men that were with Emmett Till the night that he was lynched? Where did they go? I heard one of them ran off to St. Louis. Why were they there? Were they dragged there? Were they forced there? Like, what happened? Why were they there? Why? Why? Nobody really knows. What happened to all of the people who were involved and hid hid different things? What happened to them? It's just so many questions. Even when there was a case where there were witnesses there, what happened at the store? There's so many differing accounts. There was even an account where somebody's like, there were no girls there. There was only all boys there. Like, it just varies. But how I keep focus for myself is I just say, you know what? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what he said or what she said or what they thought they saw or what she thought they saw. At the end of the day, it's two or more grown adults brutally lynching a child for no reason and getting away with killing in a racist society. And that's really the whole point. That's really the whole point. You might have to add all these details to make it seem less worse than it actually is, but it is what it is. That's what it is. So, how I'm going to review this book, I'm not going to purposely go in chronological order. I may, somewhat naturally go in chronological order. I'm just going to focus on the things that stood out to me, some of the things I've noticed, some of the realizations I've come to now that I'm a little bit more mature. Every year I notice something new that I didn't notice before about certain things in Emmett Till's life and his family's life. So we're just going to start on that. So in the first chapter, the author goes into detail about Emmett Till's early life, his mother's early life. His mother was an only child, and Emmett was also an only child. I thought that was pretty interesting because that's the type of connection I feel with them. Just only childness. But his mother, they lived in Mississippi, and they relocated when she was like 2 years old. They moved to, Summit, Illinois. It was also known as Argo. And from the author's notes, it says that only 6 black families had settled there by 1922. It was founded in 1890. And it was a small suburb on the south side of Chicago. The Carthens' arrival, because Mamie's maiden name was Carthen, 2 years later was part of what came to be the Great Migration, a movement that had already inspired thousands of black families to leave the South and seek a new beginning in northern cities. That's how we ended up in St. Louis. My great-grandmother was living in Arkansas, and she came to St. Louis in 1922. She moved to Kinloch, which was a historically black town. It was a black city in St. Louis. A lot of families lived in Kinloch. My mother still will tell me about some of the names of the families. I stayed there in Kinloch on and off until the early 90s, but by the time we left, the airport had paid families to leave, so only a few people lived in Kinloch. I haven't been there in a while, so I don't know what it looks like. I don't know if they're revitalizing it. I really don't know. But some black people, a lot of black people moved from the South. They were looking for better opportunities. Some of them moved because they just didn't want to be in danger. There was a lot of lynchings happening. Others were forced off of their land and their land was taken. It was just very, very disturbing. So, Mamie, it talked about several white European immigrants also lived in the Carthens neighborhood. Although antagonism often existed in Chicago between blacks and European immigrants, as each competed for jobs, for the most part, Argo was able to avoid such conflicts. As an adult, Mamie proudly declared that some of her best friends were white. From all of the different things I've read about Mamie, or Emmett Till's mother, and just from some of the statements she's made, I can see how naive she was. Sometimes we'll be living in a bubble and we don't even realize we're in that bubble because everything seems fine. And as far as her experience with race relations, I think, from my perspective, that her life in the North and her life in the South, and like the South was just another entity. Like the things that would happen in the South wouldn't happen in the North. It was just like somebody else's issue or problem. But I don't think she like did it in a way like, oh, I'm better than you. I think it was just her being naive, you know. She was a young mother. Emmett Till's grandmother essentially raised Emmett and his mother at the same time. They were more like siblings. It was almost like a sibling relationship, even though it was her child. I believe that her being sheltered really did her a disservice. She didn't truly know too much about the real world at the time. And unfortunately, I think Emmett Till's lynching was like her coming of age story. Like it was her transition into womanhood by force, because now she had to take on a new mind, a new strength that the old version of her would have not been able to handle. I feel I was sheltered, and I had to bump my head out in the real world, get scammed a couple of times just to grow into who I am today. And I really connected with her, with Mamie, in that term. I feel I connect to the Emmett Till case because there's just so many strange, uncanny similarities between, and even the dates, like Emmett Till's father was from Missouri. My father was from Missouri. His father was just like, even his father's personality and my father's personality just seemed like the same man. And he was an only child. I was an only child. He's a Leo. I'm a Leo. It's like just very strange. Oh, and then he was lynched in 1955. My dad was born in 1955. His father was executed in Italy, and then my father's family, like in the past, came from Italy. It's just weird. It's just this weird entanglement throughout the course of time where I see a connection in that way. So with Mamie living in an environment that was still racist, but not as blatant in her face racist, I don't think she was adequately prepared or could adequately prepare Emmett for the South, even though she did try before he left. There was an incident in this book which talks about how Mamie was almost killed by her own teacher. It was a high school geometry teacher named Miss Moore, and the first thing Miss Moore did was try to mess up Mamie's grades so she couldn't get into the National Honor Society. But Miss Moore was also the swimming coach, and she told Mamie that swimming was a requirement in order to qualify. When Mamie hesitated to get into the water, Moore shoved her in. Terrified, Mamie lost consciousness and began to sink, but was rescued in time by her friend, Ollie Colbert. All the while, Miss Moore stood there laughing, said Mamie several years later. I'll never forget her as long as I live. Although this incident ended Mamie's dreams of the National Honor Society, she made the honor roll and claimed to be the first student at Argo Community High to graduate at the top in her class. This was an accomplishment in itself, But for a black girl at the time, so was graduating at all. Only a few black students had ever received a diploma. At Argo, before Mamie, most of the girls dropped out in order to marry. Mamie, who had never even dated, felt like romance had already eluded her because at age 18 she was still single. So she ends up meeting Emmett's father. And personally, over the years, as I've grown and as I've dated myself, it's just, I can see on paper that he was just a whole red flag, but she didn't see it because she was also naive. She said he treated me like I was a little girl and took relationship from the beginning. No, and took me for granted like a doll you would set on a shelf and find it there when you came back. Alma saw little that she admired in Lewis and persuaded Mamie to break up with him. Lewis saw Mamie out with another boy and created a scene in front of her house, and Alma came out and scolded them both. I flared up, declared Mamie, because I was grown and I wasn't a child anymore. It was then, I guess, that I made up my mind that I was going to marry Lewis Till. The wedding took place in Alma's living room, and Alma's her mother, October 14th, 1940. By Mamie's estimation, she conceived their only child on her wedding night, which was her first sexual encounter. As the pregnancy progressed, a friend began calling the unborn baby by the name Bobo. It stuck, even though Mamie had been favoring Mickey. So, Emmett's father, I haven't read too much about him, only a little. There is a book that's called Writing to Save a Life, which I was reading halfway, but I couldn't tell if it was a work of fiction or if it was the man like researching. I don't know. I don't know what the author was doing with that book. I'll have to read it again, but I do remember I really didn't like it, even though I got some type of information about Lewis Till. So Lewis, Emmett's father, believe he was an orphan. He made money off of boxing. He was a very worldly guy. I would like to learn more to see if he had any type of brain injury, because it seemed as if he was just quick to anger. And sometimes when you're in sports like boxing, cage fighting, and you get all the pummels in the head, pummels in the face, you're going to have a personality disorder at some point in time, on average, inevitably. Some type of emotional disturbance or something. I remember I met a boy it was like 2-3 years ago that was a cage fighter, and he was off the wall. He couldn't control his emotions. He couldn't control his anger, and he didn't know what to do. He was living in his own mental hell. And I think that's what Emmett's father was going through, because he was abusive. He abused Mamie. It says, the night she stood her ground essentially marked the end of their marriage. On that occasion, Lewis came home drunk and started a fight because Mamie was eating some greens sent over by her mother. And I think because Lewis I don't know when his mother died, but maybe since he didn't have a mother figure in his life, he was probably jealous of Mamie. He was probably jealous of her lifestyle, and he probably envied her. So her eating her mother's greens may have made him feel like, even though she's my wife, she's still her mother's baby, and I can't stand that. So he ended up choking her, because he told her to stop eating the greens, and she wouldn't. So he choked the greens out of her, and she ended up throwing a pot of boiling water on him. And long story short, he had a restraining order put against him. He went off to the military, and then he went AWOL. That I did not know. I didn't know he had come back. I didn't know that. It says, in October 1942, young Emmett took his first trip to Mississippi. Okay. A month later, Lewis suddenly showed up on Mamie's doorstep unannounced, wearing his military uniform. Despite their troubled past, the Tills had been corresponding prior to this and had decided to reconcile. During this time together, Lewis finally began to bond with his son. They should have moved. They should have just left town, but... The visit came to a halt after the Army discovered that Lewis had gone AWOL. Military police came to the house, took him away, sent him to the stockades. Apparently, he never quite learned from this experience, and less than a year after beginning his stint overseas, on January 14, 1943, he received 2 more AWOL convictions. In August 1943, he went missing for 5.5 hours, and the following December, he went absent from his base. So that was probably one of the last times she ever saw him, where he was executed in Italy. And from reading about Mamie's life and Emmett's early life, it just seemed like she was trying to piece together this family, her ideal family in her mind, because she got married maybe 3 or 4 times after Lewis, trying to get a father for Emmett, I believe. Because maybe she just couldn't live with being just a single mother. Maybe it just wasn't the vision that she wanted. She did end up eventually getting married, but this was after Emmett was lynched, of course. But as a result of that, it was just their family unit. Emmett, Aunt Alma, and Mamie. From the first chapter, the descriptions of Emmett were really nice. People were saying he was a jokester, he was a prankster, he was very responsible. He helped his mother out a lot. He was an overall good kid. And I really liked that the first chapter, the author had like quotes from people that actually knew him as, his early days as a child, his personality, and various things. So, yeah, very, very sensitive child, too. Because around the time, I think the night he got kidnapped, they had run over a dog. And he ended up crying over the dog. Because he had his own dog, Mike. Yeah, he has his own dog. Very sensitive child. Prankster, but a sensitive child. Let's see. It says, Mama kept us both in check. It says, Mississippi welcomes Emmett. Another thing that stood out to me was just, okay, right now I'm in like chapter 6 or 7. And I'm reading about the courts. And just this whole experience of reading the court transcripts, every time I read it, I just have a new realization. So, one thing that really stood out to me was how afraid everyone was of each other. How scared the people, it was black afraid of white, white afraid of black. And also, at some points, it seemed as if they were trying to have a fair case, but there was just too much racism infiltrating that fairness. Because it was like, I wish I could describe it. It was like what happened to Emmett Till was so wrong and so disturbing that you couldn't deny what happened. You couldn't deny that Milam and Brian and whoever else ended his life. So that's something they had to struggle with. And some people could sleep at night and other people could not sleep at night, both black and white. And the ones that were trying to put the case together, like trying to make it fair, it was like they had to suppress their own racism a little bit just to get that far. Like, it's just very interesting. It actually reminded me of the race relations I had as a child and just as an adult. Somebody can be nice to you. They can be polite to you. They can give you money. They can give you grants. And they'll still be racist. They'll give you clothes. They'll operate on you. And they'll still be a racist. They'll only go so far. They'll switch up on you. That's why when I read that story of like Mamie and her teacher pushing her in the water and almost killing her, it just reminded me of my situation when I was in school. Like, my teachers were nice. My classmates were nice. Everybody was polite. Yes, I would get presents. Yes, I would get like friendship. But that still doesn't mean that a nice person wasn't racist to me. That still doesn't mean that I experienced racism in my curriculum or from my neighbors. The whole basis of this case was almost fear. Fear of the other. I was talking to one of my friends because I read in the book a lot of incidents of black people sending death threats through the mail to people in the case, to Milam and Bryant. And I just think it's so fascinating that you'll send the letter, but you won't act upon it. So I said to my friend, I'm like, why didn't they just act upon it? Like, why did they just send the threat and not bring the smoke? Why? And he's like, well, you know, we only have smoke for one another. And that was a very hard pill to swallow. It really was. Because it's true. I'm not saying go for vigilantism, but if you're dealing with some vigilantes, then go off. At the time. Not right now, but in that time. I think they had a right to go off. I really personally believe, like, if you're gonna take your time to write a letter, then you might as well just go down there and finish the job. But you didn't. You let their store sit there for years. You didn't bring the smoke while they were still there. They went on and lived their whole lives, and you still did not do anything. The only smoke they had was for freaking Carolyn Bryant. But why didn't you have smoke for her husband and his brother? Obviously, they felt safe and comfortable. I also feel, just from reading about, people were so scared. Even the witnesses were so scared. It was like pulling teeth and nails just to find a witness because they felt their lives were in danger. Even one of the people that housed Mamie when she came to Mississippi for the trial, he had his own whole security team. His house was guarded, so she felt safe. Both sides were asking for security, which I thought was very interesting. They were really, really scared of each other. I really believe nobody knew how this case was going to turn out. And what's interesting is they would also bring up cases that happened where they did convict a white person for killing a black person or a black family. But with this case, they really tried to over-sexualize Emmett Till in any way, shape, and form. And I also think what really made them mad, according to this book, was just having Northerners tell them what to do and about their way of life. Sometimes you'll be living in something so toxic you become complacent and you just go with the flow, even though it is unnatural and it is dangerous. You just play your role. Was it pedagogy? I don't know if that's the right word. But this trial, every time I read it, I just laugh because it was so ridiculous. It was like a kangaroo court. Just read the transcripts. You had them treating black reporters like second-class citizens and trying to attack reporters and just trying everything. Changing people's stories. Milam and Brian confessed, yet they weren't arrested. They confessed to the kidnapping, but they didn't confess to the lynching. That's why they had to exhume Emmett Till's body in 2005, just to prove that it was his body. Because at the time they were saying the NAACP planted a body. So in this year of my annual Emmett Till review, like the difference between this year and the other years is Carolyn Bryant is dead right now. She was alive in the other years and she's dead in this year. So just her death made me really take another look at the case, as I said. And I didn't know what to say. In regards to, you had all of this smoke. You went to her house. But where was the smoke for her husband? Yes, you sent a letter. Yes, you were talking on the phone. But you didn't pull through. You didn't pull up. Am I promoting violence? I'm not saying it. But I'm just like, I mean, if you're going to be vigilante with a vigilante, I'm sure they tried, because there was some incidents in the chapter about the Tallahatchie court case where there were people with Chicago license plates and there were men with guns, but you still didn't follow through. You still let their store stand. And it just reminded me so much of what happened here in Ferguson. The one person that really, really stood up, he ended up getting killed. It was Darren Seals, I think. I think that was his name. Hold on one second. Okay, I found it. I was talking about Darren Seals. This newspaper is from the St. Louis American. It was September 22nd to the 28th, 2016. This says, Ferguson activist Darren Seals laid to rest. And Darren Seals did a lot for the community. He was mentoring others. He really wasn't afraid of anything. Almost like Malcolm X, in a way. And it's interesting, like, when something really large happens, when a tragic event happens, there's always that one. But that one person has to be fearless. And in this case, as I stated, it was Emmett Till's mother who was the fearless one. And because she had no fear, other people had to rise up to her occasion. She had to gather strength from within herself and outside of herself in order to be a leader. But I just think it's interesting how collectively sometimes we'll complain about something but we collectively will not do anything. We might have small organizations and all of these things, small organizations or big organizations, but collectively as a group think, I guess that's the wrong word, collectively as a group think, because we're unanimously, we just let it slide. Sometimes when I'm reading about the Emmett Till case, it just reminds me of Ferguson, because Ferguson happened here. I grew up in Ferguson too. How people raise so much money to fund the officer who killed my grandma. The same thing with with Milam and Bryant. There was funds being raised to help them. There's also funds being raised to help Emmett Till's mother, of course, but just the way things stay the same, no matter how many years pass by. I think a lot of the people in that courtroom that were racist were very, very bitter and very, very jealous, especially when you had like Emmett Till's mother coming up looking polished and Carolyn Bryant just looking dowdy, probably wearing her best dress and still looking like a potato sack. Girl, you look washed up for real. Like, you need some under eye cream for those dark circles and a witch's hat for your little witch's nose. Whereas Emmett Till's mother, she was just looking like I stepped out of a magazine. She looked like a Barbie doll. She looked really cute in some of the pictures that I saw. But I think our issue is we're always waiting for a savior. We're always waiting for somebody to save us when we should just take initiative. The reason the people sent the letter but never acted on the letter, I feel it was because they knew collectively we weren't going to follow through. That's why after the main person gets assassinated or something, the movement dies, because nobody's willing to step up to the level that that person is willing to step up to. Even though a lot of people talk trash about Martin Luther King and all of that, I may not agree with everything that he did, but I will tell you one thing. If I got stabbed, you would never see me again in the civil rights movement. Oh, hell no. I'd be like, bye. I'm out. And you blew up my house? I'm gone. Goodbye. But he's still stuck with it. I wish someday we could all have the fearlessness of Mamie Till Mobley and have the leader within us showcase itself before the world. When we have a nation of leaders, that's a very powerful thing, because everybody's operating on the highest level that they are operating on, especially if it's like something related to righteousness. Whereas in that courtroom, America failed once again. Once again. It really showed how demonic this country can be. Because how can you look at the battered face of Emmett Till and not be afraid of the hands that did that to him? And there's still people like that walking among us right now. Either they're actually doing the battering or they're funding the battering. Emmett Till, now that I'm older and thinking of the case Not only from the perspective of like a woman, I'm not a mother as of yet, but also as just a spiritual person. There was a lot of just spirituality going on with this case as well. Emmett Till's mother tried to unalive herself, but she said a voice stopped her, and the voice gave her meaning for this whole entire tragedy. And she realized that her son was a sacrificial lamb. Also, I was very curious, and I wanted to see what the moon phase was on the night Emmett Till got kidnapped. Because, you know, like, some people like moons and different things. So, the night that he was kidnapped, the moon was in, like, waning gibbous, which is, hold on. No, it was a waxing gibbous, I think. It was in a waxing gibbous phase. And the waxing gibbous moon phase means a time for reflection. It signifies the final stretch of completing a project. It means redirection, adjustment, and flexibility. Your plans are being challenged and your patience is being tested. Emmett Till's death truly changed the course of events, especially for the civil rights movement, because how can you not look at the face of this child and not feel something? If you look at Emmett Till's face, his before and after, and you feel nothing, I don't know where your soul went. Either you feel fear, you feel anger, you feel shock, you feel something. You feel the humanity of the situation. And he was literally the straw that broke the camel's back, where people were like, you know what, I've had enough. If this can happen to a child, what will happen to me? Even children thought the same thing. They're like, we're the same age. If they did that to him, what will they do to me? And after that, a lot of people lost their fear to stand up for themselves and to say, you're not about to beat me for the rest of my life and beat my children too. The hell? So, I really think Emmett Till's death, even as far as an American history, just like it was his mother's coming of age story, it was also one of America's many coming of age stories. If that makes any sense. It truly showed how wicked a racist society can be. Because there were lynchings happening before Emmett Till and after Emmett Till. But a lot of them weren't showcased in a person's face like that, except on postcards, but rarely in the papers, you know. Sometimes every once in a while, but not that often. We always think, whatever time we're in, oh, this can't happen during this time. It's the year such and such is such and such. Oh, it can't happen during this time. This is 1955. Oh, it can't happen in this time. This is 2023. A couple of years ago, as I stated, a black man was beheaded and his head was laid on somebody's porch. It can happen anytime. People are the same as they were yesterday and will be tomorrow. It's just up to us to create a better society and collectively change our minds and collectively work on the fear. If you're a racist person, you need to get some help. Because when you're racist, you're capable of anything. When you're racist, it's easy to dehumanize another person. And once you dehumanize something, you are capable of anything. The people in this case, not only did they lie, they hid their hands, they laughed about it, and they will pay on a spiritual level. Because if you'll lie, you'll steal, you'll cheat, and you will kill. And they did all of that. That is why Emmett came to the surface after 3 days. It was his resurrection. His own resurrection for America. But yeah, so far so good this book has been. I will have to finish it at a later time. I will see you all again August 3rd on my birthday. And then we will resume the regular schedule of filming. Talk to you later.